All right, I need you to really pay attention right now, because what happened in the last 72 hours is something that I think most people are reading completely backwards. And I am not saying that to be dramatic. I am saying it because I have spent the last 2 days going through every major piece of reporting on this conflict. And the framing that every major outlet is using right now is almost the exact opposite of what the actual data is telling you. Here is what every channel is saying today, July 26, 2026. Airstrikes have paused, talks are pressing forward, there is hope. NPR ran a headline this morning saying both the US and Iran want to return to the interim ceasefire deal. NBC News is reporting that mediators from Qatar and Pakistan are working to restart ceasefire talks amid a fragile pause. Al Jazeera just published a piece titled "Hopes of Return to Diplomacy as US and Iran Hold Fire for a Third Day." Every single one of those headlines is technically accurate, and every single one of them is missing the actual story. Because while all of that was being written, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi went on NBC News Meet the Press and said something that should have been the lead story on every channel in the world. He said, and I am quoting him directly, "We are not asking for a ceasefire, and we don't see any reason why we should negotiate with the US when we have already negotiated with them twice." He said Iran does not accept a ceasefire. What Iran wants is a complete, sustainable end to the war with full guarantees it will not resume, plus compensation for damages. And then he said the thing that I think is the most important sentence of this entire conflict. He said, "We are not asking for a ceasefire." Not that Iran is considering its options, not that Iran is waiting for better terms. Iran's foreign minister on American television said Iran is not asking for a ceasefire and sees no reason to negotiate. That is a door being slammed shut. And every headline today is writing about the draft underneath the door instead of the slam. So let me give you the 3 things I want to cover today, and then we are going to go very deep on each one. First, I want to walk you through the specific sequence of Iranian rejections over the last 72 hours, because there have been multiple, and they form a pattern that I think tells you something crucial about where Tehran's head is right now. Second, I want to talk about what the New York Times published yesterday, July 26th, specifically the headline that used the word trapped to describe Trump's position, because that word was chosen carefully, and I want to unpack exactly why it is accurate. And third, I want to explain what no exit strategy actually means in practice for America right now. Because Trump was directly asked about his exit strategy on Friday, and his answer was one of the most revealing things any American president has said publicly about this conflict. Quick disclaimer before we go further, everything I am about to say is based on public reporting. I could be wrong. I am going to give you the sources, and I strongly encourage you to go verify every single thing independently. That is not a formality. That is the only way this kind of analysis should work. All right. Let's start with the rejection sequence, because I think when you lay these out chronologically in a single place, the picture becomes very clear. On July 23rd, the Iraqi Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi flew personally to Tehran, not an envoy, not a diplomat, the Prime Minister himself carrying a ceasefire proposal from the United States. I want you to understand why this choice of messenger matters so much. Iraq shares a long border with Iran. Iraq has deep Shia religious and cultural ties with Iran. Iran-backed political factions are literally part of the Iraqi government. If there is one human being on this planet who could walk into Tehran and get a yes from Iran without Iran losing face domestically, it is the Iraqi Prime Minister. He is not America's messenger. He is Iran's neighbor, Iran's partner, and in many ways, Iran's ally. Iran said no. The Jerusalem Post confirmed it. I-24 News confirmed it. The New York Times confirmed it. Iran rejected a ceasefire proposal delivered by the one person most likely to get a yes. Then on July 24th, Trump told Axios he is considering a massive attack bigger than ever before and that he is close to a decision. Trump said Iran has not received enough pain yet. His team floated the idea of striking bridges and power plants. The Atlantic reported that the administration has said almost nothing about why it returned to bombing on July 14th, and that the strategy has shifted without any public explanation of what the new objective actually is. And then on July 26th, the same day the pause headlines are running everywhere, Trump stood in front of cameras and said the United States is locked and loaded. NBC News confirmed it. ABC News confirmed it. Fox News confirmed it. Locked and loaded is not the language of a negotiating pause. Locked and loaded is the language of a military posture. And then IRGC went on, meet the press, and said Iran is not asking for a ceasefire. The sequence in 72 hours is this. Iran rejects the Iraqi prime minister's proposal. Trump says locked and loaded. IRGC says no ceasefire, no reason to negotiate. And the headlines say hopes of return to diplomacy. I want you to hold that contradiction in your mind as we go forward because it is going to become very important. Now, let me talk about the New York Times piece from July 26th, because I think the choice of the word trapped in that headline is one of the most honest things any major American outlet has published about this conflict. The headline was, Trump seems trapped by Iran war, even as he wields the world's most powerful military. And I want to unpack that sentence very carefully because every word in it is doing a specific job. Trump seems trapped, not losing, not failing, trapped. Because trapped describes a situation where the conventional tools available to you are not producing the outcome you need and where every available path forward has significant costs attached to it. That is the situation America is in right now, and the Times is the first major outlet to say it that directly. Here is what the trap actually looks like in structural terms. The United States cannot win this conflict militarily in the traditional sense, because Iran has deliberately designed its military structure to survive and absorb exactly the kind of campaign America has been running. CENTCOM has struck over 11,000 targets. Khamenei is dead. The top military command is gone. $100 billion has been spent. And Iran's foreign minister is on American television saying we are not asking for a ceasefire and we see no reason to negotiate. That is not the behavior of a side that is losing. That is the behavior of a side that has made a strategic calculation that time is moving in its favor. But America also cannot escalate to a level that would actually force Iranian capitulation for three specific reasons. First, CSIS published data showing that American air defense stockpiles have been depleted by potentially over 50% for some key systems during this conflict. Recovery timeline is at minimum 2 to 3 years. The physical inventory to sustain a significantly larger campaign is not there in unlimited quantities. Second, The Atlantic noted that the Trump administration has said almost nothing about what the new objective is after returning to bombing on July 14th. The original objective was regime change. That objective was abandoned without any public acknowledgement. When you change your objective without telling anyone, it means you have not achieved the original one, and you do not have a replacement that you are confident enough to announce. Third, and this is the one that matters most politically, Time magazine published a piece on July 16th titled "A War Neither America nor Iran Can Win." And the Soufan Center published an analysis on July 13th saying the U.S.-Iran conflict will remain in a no-war, no-peace status indefinitely as neither side is able to deter the other. When your own country's analysts are publishing pieces titled "A War Neither Side Can Win," the escalation path does not lead to victory. It leads to more of the same at higher cost. And America cannot accept Iran's terms, because Iran's terms are not the terms of a side that lost. IRGC said explicitly that Iran wants a complete, sustainable end to the war with full guarantees it will not resume, and compensation for damages. That word compensation is the tell. Countries that have been militarily defeated do not demand compensation from the country that defeated them. Countries that believe they have Strategic leverage, demand compensation. Iran is not asking for a ceasefire. Iran is asking for acknowledgement that what happened to it was a wrong that needs to be made right. That is not the opening position of a broken adversary. That is the opening position of a side that thinks it can afford to wait. So America cannot win militarily. America cannot escalate decisively. And America cannot accept the terms that Iran is actually putting forward. That is the trap. And the reason the New York Times called it a trap and not just a difficult situation is because a difficult situation has visible paths out. A trap is when every path has a cost that exceeds the benefit of taking it. That is where America is right now on July 26th, 2026. Now, let me give you the strongest counter-argument because you should always test your analysis against the best version of the opposing view. The counter-argument goes like this. The pause is real. Both sides do want to return to some form of the interim ceasefire, and NPR specifically reported that a compromise being negotiated centers on having Iran run certain inspections, which is a workable middle ground. Oman has a genuine track record as a successful mediator. Iran's economy is under enormous strain, with inflation close to 90% and infrastructure damage that the Iranian government itself has not fully quantified. No country can absorb this level of punishment indefinitely. IRGC's public statements are for domestic consumption, not for the negotiating table. The real negotiations happen through back channels, and IRGC saying no ceasefire on Meet the Press is exactly what a negotiator says publicly when they are privately moving toward a deal. That argument is coherent. Parts of it are true. I acknowledge that fully. But here is what that argument cannot explain. The Iraqi Prime Minister went to Tehran in person. That was not a public statement for domestic consumption. That was a private diplomatic mission carried out in person at the highest possible level of trust and personal relationship. And Iran said no. If Iran's public statements are theater and the real Iran is willing to deal, then you would expect the real Iran to respond positively to the most credible, most private, most trust-based approach that could possibly have been made. The real Iran said no to the Iraqi Prime Minister's face. That is not theater. That is the actual position. And then there is Trump's own answer to the exit strategy question. NPR reported on July 27th that when asked directly about his exit strategy, Trump said there are two ways. He did not specify what those two ways are with any precision. The Hill ran a piece specifically about the uncertainty swirling around Trump's exit strategy. NTD Television reported that Trump said his exit strategy involves the American military achieving its objectives without defining what those objectives currently are, given that the original objective of regime change has been functionally abandoned. When a president is asked what his exit strategy is, and his answer is, there are two ways, without completing the sentence in a way that constitutes an actual plan, that tells you something very important. It tells you that the exit strategy question does not have a clean answer. And a war that does not have a clean answer to the exit strategy question is a war that tends to continue far longer than anyone intended. So let me give you three specific things to watch over the next week that will tell you whether the door Iran just slammed is permanent or whether there is a window somewhere in that wall. First, watch IRGC's language specifically. He said on Meet the Press that Iran sees no reason to negotiate because it has already negotiated twice and gotten nothing for it. The signal to watch is not whether Iran agrees to talks. The signal is whether IRGC or any senior Iranian official uses the phrase full end to the war in any context that sounds like a condition rather than a demand. As long as their framing is, we want permanent end plus compensation, the door is closed. If the framing ever shifts to we are open to a framework that addresses core concerns, that is the first crack in the door. Second, watch the oil price. Brent crude crossed $100 on July 23rd after the Houthi tanker attacks and settled at $98.38 on July 24th, according to Trading Economics. If the price falls below $90 in a sustained way over the next 7 days, the market is telling you that the pause is developing into something real at the Hormuz level regardless of what any official is saying publicly. If it stays above $95, the market is telling you the closure risk is still fully priced in, which means the pause is exactly what it looks like, which is a pause and not a breakthrough. Third, watch whether Trump actually orders the massive attack he told Axios he is considering. He said locked and loaded. He said bigger than ever before. He said Iran has not received enough pain yet. If that attack happens, the door Iran just slammed gets welded shut, and the no-exit trap the New York Times described becomes significantly deeper. If the locked and loaded language fades over the next week without an attack, then like every previous escalation threat in this conflict, it was leverage rather than intent. And the question becomes whether leverage that is never used retains any coercive value at all. Here is your homework. Read the New York Times piece from July 26th titled, "Trump Seems Trapped by Iran War." Read the full piece, not just the headline. Specifically, look at the section where it describes the gap between the military tools available and the political outcomes achievable, because that gap is the structural definition of the trap the paper is describing. Then watch the NBC News clip of IRGC on Meet the Press. Listen specifically to how he answers the question about whether Iran is asking for a ceasefire. The answer is short. It is unambiguous, and it is the exact opposite of every headline running today. Then go to Trading Economics and check the Brent crude price every day for the next 2 weeks, not to trade, to use as a real-time ground truth signal for what is actually happening at Hormuz underneath all the diplomatic noise. And let me leave you with the question I actually want you to sit with. Iran rejected the Iraqi Prime Minister's proposal in person. Iran's foreign minister went on American television and said there is no reason to negotiate. Trump is locked and loaded and has no publicly defined exit strategy. The New York Times is using the word trapped to describe the most powerful military in human history. And the question that nobody is asking out loud right now is this: if America cannot win militarily, cannot escalate decisively, cannot accept Iran's terms, and cannot define what victory looks like after abandoning the original objective of regime change, then what exactly is the plan? And if there is no plan, who is going to be the one to say that out loud first? I will see you in the next one.